Dear students, subscribers, and the viewers, welcome to the IAS Mentor. This would be our lecture number 64 in the series Indian Polity. So, we have come a substantial distance since we have started this particular series. We have covered number of important topics. Of late, we have been looking into the topic of the Union Executive, and to be very specific, in the Union Executive, we are looking into the topic of the President. And we have seen number of constitutional provisions with regard to the president. We have seen whether the president is a real executive or a nominal executive. And then we have also seen the various powers and functions of the president, including his executive powers, his legislative powers, which includes the ordinance making power, which includes his power to summon, prorogue, dissolve the houses, his power to pardon the punishment, which is also his judicial powers, and then we also understood his emergency powers. So basically, the president can exercise three types of emergency powers: the national emergency, the state emergency or the president rule, and the financial emergency. And most importantly, we also understood the consequences in case of these emergencies. Whenever these emergency powers are exercised, what are the consequences that may arise as per the provisions of the constitution, wherein we have seen that how the federal political system becomes more or less unitary in character. So, and apart from this, the president is also said that he exercises military powers and also diplomatic powers. So, basically, these are all very marginal, or I would say very nominal in character, where the president is also considered to be the head of the armed forces. But again, it is only for the namesake. The real power is rested in the hands of the Council of Ministers. And similarly, whatever treaty that India enters into, whatever decisions that we take with regard to relationship with a foreign country, when we invite certain foreign dignitaries, when we depute Indian dignitaries to foreign countries, it is all done in the name of the President of India. So therefore, it is also said that he exercises certain diplomatic powers, but these are not very detailed things to see, which is not very relevant for the purpose of examination. So this much of understanding is sufficient. Now we are moving into the next important powers, but not with regard to the president, but with regard to the vice president. So now we are moving to the next part of the executive, union executive, that is the vice president. Because already we have understood that the union executive is comprised of the president, the vice president, the prime minister, and the council of ministers. So now let us try to understand about the vice president. What are the constitutional provisions related to the vice president of India? What are all the various powers and functions that he is supposed to exercise? How is the Indian vice president different from the vice president of United States of America? Because in both the constitution there is provision for vice president. But however, later we will understand that the vice president in India is more a nominal executive, whereas there the vice president is more a real executive. So we will try to understand all those things as we will proceed further. Alright, so with that, let us try to first understand some of the basic constitutional provisions when it comes to the Vice President of India. So then we'll try to understand one by one. So the first thing that we want to discuss is, what are the qualifications for one to get elected as a Vice President of India? Because we know that under the constitution that both the president and the vice president are elected, although they are elected indirectly, not by direct election. So what is common between both the president and the vice president? They are all elected by an indirect election. So the moment I say that they are elected by an indirect election, that there is something which is called as an electoral college. That means they are not elected by all the people, but they are elected by an electoral college. So electoral college always mean that there are certain categories of people who will be eligible to vote in these elections. So the president has a different electoral college, the vice president has got a different electoral college. As we will proceed, we will try to understand as to who constitutes the electoral college. So what are the, before that, what are the qualifications for someone to get elected as the vice president of India? First, he should be a citizen of India. That is very, very important. Whether he is a natural citizen or a natural born citizen, that does not matter, but should be a citizen of India and should have completed 35 years of age. That is, minimum he has completed 35 years of age. In addition to that, the constitution says that he should be qualified for election to a member of Rajya Sabha. So what are the qualifications for someone to get elected as a member of Rajya Sabha? So that also is mentioned in the constitution. So for someone to get elected as a member of Rajya Sabha, So they should have completed, they should have attained 30 years of age, but that is again overruled by 35 years of age. And then they should be a citizen, that is also given already. And apart from that, they should be an elector from any constituency in India. So elector from any constituency in India, be it in any state or be it in any union territory. So in every state there is a constituency, there are a number of constituencies. So from anywhere in India, so for that particular matter, today we have got 543 constituencies for the Lok Sabha elections. So one of the qualification for someone to contest election to the Vice President of India as per the constitution is that they should be a citizen of India, so they should have completed 35 years of age. In addition to that, they should be an elector from any constituency in India. So that is again very important. So that is one of the qualification for someone to contest election to Rajya Sabha, which is also to be satisfied for someone to contest election to the Vice President. So in addition to all those things, he or she should be an elector from any constituency in India, which is a requirement to contest election to Rajya Sabha, which is in turn a requirement to contest election to the Vice President of India. So he or she should be an elector from any constituency in India, or to put it in a very simple way, he or she should be an eligible voter. He or she should possess a voter ID. So then they are also eligible to contest election to the Vice President. And apart from that, the constitution also says any other qualifications as may be determined by law for being a member to contest election to Rajya Sabha, which is in turn a qualification to become elected to the office of the Vice President of India. So apart from all those things, if there is a law, the law can also determine certain qualifications. Say for example, the Representation of People Act determines certain qualification. One example is the Representation of People Act says that to be a qualified voter, they should not be convicted in a court of law. If they are convicted in a court of law, they are not eligible to be a voter. So therefore, they have to satisfy all these things also. So therefore, all these qualifications should also be satisfied to contest election to the Vice President. Apart from all these things, to contest election to the office of the Vice President, they should also not hold on to any office of profit. This is again very, very important. So what does it mean when I say that they should not hold on to any office of profit, which is again very important? That what is office of profit is not defined in the constitution. It itself is a very separate question that has been asked in UPSC. So what is office of profit is nowhere defined in the constitution. But however, what do you understand when I say office of profit? As per the Supreme Court intervention, any office either under the center, state or any of the local government by way of which a profit is receivable. Even if a profit is receivable, the profit can be salary, the profit can be any of the other benefits by holding on to this office. It is not necessary that somebody is taking the profit, but even if the profit is receivable, even if the individual is not taking the profit, but if the office provides for the profit, that itself is sufficient enough to consider that particular office to be an office of profit. So hence, for a person to contest election to the office of the Vice President, what are the qualifications one has to possess? One has to possess the following qualifications. For an elaborate discussion on what is office of profit, refer to my topic on the President, where I have taken an elaborate discussion for 15 to 20 minutes in explaining as to what is an office of profit, but I have given the crux of what is of office of profit even in this particular lecture. So for someone to contest election to the office of the Vice President, they have to possess the following qualifications. What are the qualifications they have to possess? So first is that they should be a citizen of India. Second, they should have completed 35 years of age. 3, they should be qualified to contest election to Rajya Sabha, which means for which they have to be a citizen of India, completed 35 years of age, but that is overruled by this 35 years of age. In addition to that, they should be a qualified voter from any constituency in India. So that means in any of the 543 constituencies, they should be registered as a voter. And apart from that, any other qualification that may be prescribed by law. So all these conditions has to be satisfied. In addition to that, they should also not hold any office of profit. So anybody satisfying all these qualifications, then they can contest election to the office of the Vice President. If they are not satisfying any of these qualifications, the law and the constitution does not allow them to contest election to the office of the Vice President. But however, the term office of profit, I said that any office either under the center, state or the local government by way of which the profit is receivable, they would be considered to be an office of profit. But however, there are certain exceptions to this office of profit. That means certain office is not falling under the definition of office of profit. So people who are occupying those office, they can hold on to that office till they can contest the election of the vice president. That is not considered to be an office of profit. Apart from these officers, if anybody is in the government job, can they contest election to the office of the president? No. Or office of the vice president? No. Because then that would be considered to be an office of profit. But there are certain exceptions to what would be considered to be an office of profit. What are the exceptions? The office of the president, the office of the vice president, the office of governors in any state, and the office of the ministers, either under the central government or under the state government. It does not matter. Any of these ministers, all these people can contest election to the office of the vice president. It does not matter. It does not matter whether they are in the office or not. They can be a vice president. That means a sitting vice president, without resigning from his office, can contest election to the office of the vice president. A sitting president can contest election to the office of the vice president. Whether he does it or not, that's a different thing, but the constitution allows it. A sitting governor of any of the state, without resigning from the office, can contest election to the office of the vice president. A sitting minister, be it a central minister or a state minister, can contest election to the office of the vice president, because these offices would not be considered to be an office of profit, because these exceptions are given in the constitution itself. Apart from this, the other officers is not allowed, because they would be considered to be an office of profit, because these exceptions are given in the constitution itself. Apart from that, this is not mentioned in the constitution, but there is the President Vice President Election Act 1952 that says that anyone who wanted to contest election to the office of the vice president, his name has to be proposed by 20 members from the electoral college as proposers and 20 members as seconders. Proposers are those people who put forward the name. Seconders are those people who support the proposers. So that's basically you'll have to understand. So this is not mentioned in the constitution, but you can remember this is a requirement as per the Election Vice President Act 1952, which says that suppose if somebody wanted to contest election to the office of the president, who will satisfy all these conditions. Once they satisfy all these conditions, apart from that, the name of those individuals has to be proposed by 20 members from the electoral college, not ordinary citizens, 20 members from the electoral college. So electoral college means only these are the people who are eligible to vote in the vice president election. So we'll try to understand as to who will be part of the electoral college. So out of the electoral college, 20 members have to be proposers, and then another 20 members has to be what is called as seconders. Okay, so these conditions should also be satisfied. So once they satisfy all these conditions, then the person is eligible to contest the elections. That's basically what is called as qualification. So qualification itself is a very important topic. So what are the qualifications? One should be a citizen of India, completed 35 years of age, should be an elector from any constituency in India, and then any other criteria which is put forward by the law made by the parliament, and apart from that should not hold an office of profit. But although there are certain exceptions to as to what is office of profit, and apart from that, the name of the candidate has to be supported by 20 members from the electoral college as proposers and 20 members from the electoral college as seconders. But however, this is not mentioned in the constitution. This is as per the election of president or the President Vice President Election Act. All right. So these are the things that probably you may have to keep in your mind. But remember what is given in the constitution, what is not given in the constitution. Okay. So this you can keep it in your mind. So with that, we'll move forward. We'll try to understand as to what are the conditions of the office of the Vice President. So before I move forward, just think about this. What is the difference between the conditions of office of president and the qualification to conduct election to the office of the vice president? So the basic difference between qualifications and the conditions of office. So what is the basic difference between them? The basic difference between qualifications and conditions. Qualifications is prior to contesting the election. So if anybody wanted to contest election to the office of the vice president, they have to satisfy certain conditions. That's basically what is called as qualifications. And what is conditions? So conditions to the office of the vice president means after a person get elected as the vice president, he has to satisfy certain conditions to be in that office. And that's basically what is called as conditions to the office of the vice president. There's a difference between qualifications and conditions. Do not get confused. A similar thing is also there for the president, which you already discussed. So similarly, once somebody get elected to the office of the vice president, after he satisfies all the qualifications, he contests election, he wins the election, he becomes a vice president. To continue in the office of the vice president, he has to satisfy these conditions. So what are the conditions? One, he should not be a member of either houses of the parliament. That means the constitution does not bar a member of parliament or a member of state legislature from contesting the election. They can contest the election, but the moment they win the election of vice president, then they cannot continue to be a member of parliament or a member of state legislature. That means the moment you are elected as a vice president, then you can only act as a vice president, and then you cannot continue to be a member of parliament or a member of state legislature. Although you can contest the election to the office of the vice president as a member of parliament or a member of state legislature, the moment you win, then your member of parliament or member of state legislature automatically cease to exist. That's the condition. And apart from that, the vice president should not hold on to any office of profit. So office of profit is a condition for both the things. To contest election also, you should not hold on to any office of profit. And the moment you become vice president of India, and apart from vice president of India, you should not occupy any of the other office. So that is what basically you have to understand. You cannot occupy any of the other office of profit apart from the office of the vice president. Don't confuse that he is also the chairman of Rajya Sabha. He is a chairman of Rajya Sabha, but he is an ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. Ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha means that is not a separate post. By virtue of being vice president, he occupies the office of the chairman Rajya Sabha. So that cannot be considered to be an office of profit. It is a vice president whose normal function is to act as an ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. But apart from that, he cannot hold any of the other office of profit. So these two conditions are very, very important. So now we have understood the qualifications of the office of the vice president and then the conditions of the office of the vice president. So we'll move forward. Let us try to understand the other constitutional dimensions. So first we'll try to understand the different constitutional dimensions are the constitutional provisions about the vice president of India. Then we'll move forward in understanding the functions that the vice president is supposed to perform under the constitution. What are the other constitutional dimension is how the vice president is elected. As I already said, the vice president in India is elected by an indirect election. So whenever I talk about indirect election, that means you'll have to keep it in your mind. Indirect election means that the vice president is not elected by the people directly. Unlike the election to Lok Sabha or the legislative assemblies, it's a direct election. So every adult individual will have the right to vote. That's a direct election. Indirect election is always only a group of people. A selected number of people will have the right to vote. That's basically what is called as an indirect election. So that means wherever there's an indirect election, there's an electoral college. So who is part of the electoral college of the vice president? For the vice president, the electoral college is the members of both the houses of parliament. That is the members of Lok Sabha as well as the members of Rajya Sabha. So whoever is part of the members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they will have the right to vote. Now here one thing that you have to notice, here there is no distinction of whether he is an elected member or a nominated member. Unlike in case of the electoral college of the president, you will see in the electoral college of the president only the elected members of the parliament are part of it. Whereas here in case of the vice president, both elected as well as the nominated members. So that's very, very important. Do not make a mistake here. Elected plus nominated members. So both are elected as well as the nominated members of the parliament are part of the electoral college. So both can vote in the elections. So that is basically what you'll have to understand. So the electoral college, because it is having only the members of the parliament, the Constituent Assembly did not make any distinction as to what is elected and nominated members. So both will have the right to vote. That means all the 543 members of the Lok Sabha, 245 members of the Rajya Sabha, both elected and nominated will be part of the electoral college. What is the principle of election? The principle of election is based on proportional representation by means of single transferable vote, and the voting is by secret ballot. Whatever we have seen in case of the president, it is the same thing. So you can go to the topic of the president where you will try to understand proportional representation by means of single transfer vote, and the voting is by secret ballot. But UPSC is not going to ask any question from the understanding of the principle, but you just remember the principle. But if you want to know the principle, you can go to my president topic where I have clearly explained as to what is the concept of single transfer vote, and the voting is by what is called as secret ballot and what is called as proportional representation. So the same principle is followed in this particular case as well. The moment the vice president is elected, and if there is any dispute with regard to the election of the vice president, is there any way that the election of the vice president can be challenged? Yes. The only forum where the election of the vice president can be challenged is the Supreme Court of India. It is the Supreme Court of India where it can be disputed, and the Supreme Court of India can declare the election of vice president as unconstitutional if it feels that the election is not carried out in accordance with the provisions of the constitution. But however, the Supreme Court has made it very clear that the election of the vice president cannot be challenged on the ground that there is vacancy in the electoral college. That means some of the members of the parliament is not there. If there is a vacancy in the electoral college, but still the election is conducted by the Election Commission of India, that's a valid election. But there can be other grounds on which it can be challenged, but not on the grounds as to there is vacancy in the electoral college. And suppose if the election is declared to be invalid, the election of the vice president is declared to be invalid by the Supreme Court. This is also very important. What will happen to the prior actions that was done by the vice president? Will it continue to be valid? Yes, all those actions would be continue to be valid. Only his election is invalid, not the action that was done by the vice president prior to declaring the election to be invalid. So this is also something that you'll have to keep in your mind. So these are all few important constitutional dimensions or provisions that you may have to keep in your mind. All right. So with that, we'll move to the next part. We'll try to understand some other constitutional dimensions when it comes to the vice president. So what is the term of office? So normally, usually the tenure of the office of the vice president is 5 years. Is he eligible for re-election? Yes, he is eligible for re-election. So there is no restriction with regard to re-election of the vice president. And if the vice president wants to resign at any time, he can resign. So to whom he has to submit his resignation? He has to submit the resignation to the President of India. This we have already seen it. The president will submit the resignation to the vice president, and the vice president will submit the resignation to the president. So this is what the constitution says. And apart from that, there is also a process by which the vice president can be removed from his office. The word that is used in the constitution is removal. In case of president, the word that is used is impeachment. But for the vice president, the word that is used is removed. Can the vice president be removed from his office before the completion of his tenure of 5 years? Yes. Normally the tenure is 5 years since the day he assumes the office. But if the vice president is to be removed, he can be removed. There's a process that is given in the constitution. And what is a process that is given in the constitution? For this, a removal motion has to be introduced. So a proposal has to be introduced in the parliament. So where this proposal can be introduced, which is relating to removing the vice president, this proposal can be introduced only in the Rajya Sabha. So this is very, very important. So this proposal can be introduced where? It can be introduced only in the Rajya Sabha by any member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha. They can introduce this particular proposal. But before introducing this proposal, a 14 days notice has to be given to the vice president, informing the vice president that we are going to introduce a removal motion. So once a 14 days notice is given, and after the 14 days notice, it is given to the vice president, such a proposal can be introduced in the Rajya Sabha, where the proposal will be discussed and then the proposal will be put to vote. And this proposal has to be passed with what is called as effective majority. This is very, very important. What is a majority with which it has to be passed in the Rajya Sabha? It has to be passed with what is called as effective majority. And what is this effective majority? I have already discussed. There's a separate video that I have made on different types of majorities. You can watch that. But for the students who are watching this particular lecture directly, what is effective majority? Effective majority means it is the majority of the effective membership of the House. And what is effective membership? Effective membership is total membership minus vacancies. And a majority of that would be effective majority. For example, suppose let us assume in the Rajya Sabha, there are only 230 members. That means the total membership is 245, but let us assume there are 15 vacancies. Vacancies can be because of any reason. I am not talking about the absence, I am talking about vacancies. Vacancies may be because of disqualification of members, maybe death of some members, whatever be the reason. Suppose let us assume there are 15 vacancies, so therefore there are only 230 effective members. So effective membership is total membership minus vacancy, 245 minus 15. So effective membership is 230. A majority of that is 116. That would be what is called as effective majority. So it has to be passed with effective majority in the Rajya Sabha, and after passed with effective majority in the Rajya Sabha, then the proposal will be sent to the Lok Sabha. In the Lok Sabha, it has to be passed with simple majority. So this is very, very important. So the majority is different in both the houses. While in Rajya Sabha, it is effective majority, whereas in Lok Sabha, it is simple majority. The moment it is passed with simple majority in the Lok Sabha, the vice president stands removed. So similarly, the process is there for the president also. So students who have watched the process of impeachment of the president, so what is the majority in case of the president? So put it in the comment box. While the majority in case of president is little different from the majority in case of the vice president. And also in case of president is a majority same in both the Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. So you can put that also in the comment box. So try to put it in the comment box so that I also know that the students are following the lectures. So these are all certain important cues that I need so that it can motivate me to make a lot of videos. So I also understand that the students are following all these things. Alright, so this is the process by which the vice president can be removed from his office. And as already said, is he allowed for re-election? There is no restriction as to how many terms that one can become the vice president. So is the case for the president also. The constitution does not restrict it. Apart from that, there is also provisions in the constitution when there is a vacancy arising to the office of the vice president. So whenever there is a vacancy that arises to the office of the vice president, what is likely to happen? And what are the grounds on which in the first place the vacancy can arise to the office of the president? So the vacancy can arise to the office of the vice president on following grounds. So what are the vacancy? Expiry of his term. That means the 5-year tenure of the vice president is going to come to an end. The vacancy can arise. Or he resigns, he submits his resignation to the president, which he can do it at any point of time. So therefore the vacancy can arise. Or by the process of removal. The vice president may be removed from his office. Just now we have seen the process of the removal of the vice president. Or the vice president suddenly dies in office. Or otherwise, except these things, the office of the vice president can also become vacant because the Supreme Court can declare the election to be unconstitutional. It is possible that the election is challenged and the election of the vice president is declared unconstitutional. That is a possibility. So these are all the grounds on which there can be vacancy to the office of the vice president. So whenever there is a vacancy to the office of the vice president, who will become the vice president of India? Who will become the vice president of India? Nobody will become the vice president of India. So try to understand, because when the president is not there, when there is a vacancy to the office of the president, the vice president acts as the president of India. But when there is a vacancy to the office of the vice president, nobody will become the vice president because there is no need for a vice president. The country can still function because the constitution says there shall always be a president. But the constitution does not say that there shall always be a vice president. So when the president is not there, the vice president acts as a president. But if the vice president is not there and there is a vacancy to the office of the vice president, we have seen that as we'll proceed, we'll understand that one of the important function of the vice president is to act as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. In fact, he is the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. So his only function, as long as the president is there, is to act as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. Only when the president is not there, by reasons of death or by vacancies, he acts as the vice president. Otherwise, he normally functions as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. So, if the vacancy arises because of the reasons of resignation, removal, death or otherwise to the office of the vice president, who is supposed to act as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha, and if the vice president is not there, then the deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha would act as the chairman Rajya Sabha. So, this is very important. So you can ask me, who is his deputy chairman? The deputy chairman is a member of parliament from Rajya Sabha and elected from that particular house. So the deputy chairman will act as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. But the deputy chairman who is acting as chairman of Rajya Sabha is not the vice president. No, that is not the right understanding. The deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha will act as the chairman of Rajya Sabha till the time the vice president is elected. And once the vice president is elected, then he becomes the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. In the meantime, the deputy chairman will act as the chairman Rajya Sabha. So this is the basic understanding you should have. I am sure that till this point of time it is quite clear. So when the vacancy arises because of the reasons of resignation, death, removal or otherwise, who will act as a chairman Rajya Sabha? The deputy chairman. But still the office is vacant. The office of vice president is vacant. And if the vacancy arises because of the reason of expiry of term, that means when the incumbent vice president term is going to come to an end, his tenure is going to come to an end. Under such a circumstances, the constitution says the new vice president has to be elected even before the expiry of the term of the incumbent vice president. So that means if the tenure is going to come to an end, no problem. The new vice president will automatically assume the office on the day that the tenure of the incumbent vice president is getting over. But there might be one problem, that the new vice president is elected, but the new vice president is not able to assume the office when the incumbent vice president term is coming to an end, for the reason that the new vice president has fallen sick or he has met with an accident. So he is injured, he is in the hospital. So for a few more days, he is not able to assume the office. Under such a circumstances, what the constitution says? The constitution says the outgoing vice president would continue to be the vice president till the time the new vice president assumes the office. So therefore, the outgoing vice president would continue to be the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So that's a basic understanding. But if the vacancy arises because of all other reasons, then who will act as the chairman of Rajya Sabha? It is the deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha. So this is the basic understanding you should have. Okay, so if the vacancy arises because of resignation, removal, death, otherwise, we have seen that the deputy chairman will act as a chairman of Rajya Sabha, but we need to elect the president. So till what point of time the new vice president has to be elected? The constitution does not give any time limit. The constitution only says as soon as possible, the Election Commission of India has to conduct the election and elect the new vice president. There's no time limit in this particular regard. But what is the case in case of the president? If the office of the president becomes vacant, how long the vice president can act as the president of India, and within what point of time, maximum time limit, the president has to be elected? So put it in the comment box. But there is no time limit when it comes to the vice president of India. Be it very clear. Okay. So if you know the answer for the president, you can put it in the comment box. These are all important constitutional dimensions. You'll have to keep it in your mind. Very, very important. So now we are coming to almost the second last topic for the lecture today. What are the powers and functions of the Vice President of India? So as I already said, the important function of the Vice President in India is to act as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. What do you mean by ex officio chairman? Ex officio means by virtue of one's office. That means by virtue of getting elected as a Vice President, he automatically becomes a chairman of Rajya Sabha. So he is not elected as a chairman of Rajya Sabha. He is elected as a Vice President. Anyone who gets elected as a vice president automatically becomes a chairman of Rajya Sabha. That is what ex officio chairman. And if the vice president is not there and there is vacancy, then the deputy chairman in the Rajya Sabha would act as a chairman of Rajya Sabha. But as long as the vice president is there, the vice president is the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. So his foremost function is what? Is to act as what is called as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. This is a normal function. But if there is vacancy to the office of the president, by the reasons of death, resignation, removal or otherwise, then the vice president would act as the president of India. And how long the vice president can act as a president is maximum 6 months. This is what I have asked. Anyways, I have given the answer. For 6 months maximum, he can act as the president of India. In the meantime, within 6 months, the new president has to be elected. If the new president is elected, then automatically the vice president again acts as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. But if the president is there, his normal function is to act as what is called as the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha, nothing more than that. So this is what basically you will have to understand. All right. So these are all some important constitutional dimensions that you will have to keep it in your mind. Okay. Now, before we complete this particular discussion, let us also try to make a comparison between the Vice President of India and the Vice President of United States of America. In fact, in both the countries, when it comes to the position of Vice President, there is similarities and as well as dissimilarities. In both the countries, what is the similarity? In both the countries, the Vice President acts as the chairman of the respective upper house. In India, the Vice President acts as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. In United States of America, there also the Vice President acts as the chairman of their upper house, that is the Senate. So in both the houses, it is the in both the countries, almost it is the same. But in India, the vice president is not a real executive. In fact, even the president is not a real executive. Whereas in United States of America, there the vice president is a real executive. He is a deputy to the president. There the president is a real executive. So being his deputy, he is a real executive. The vice president actively controls certain portfolios. He decides on those portfolios. He advises the president on various matters. And the most important thing is, if the president dies with the remaining tenure, say for example, that the term of the president in case of United States of America is 4 years. That is, the tenure is 4 years. And if the president dies before completing his tenure, let us assume the president dies after 2 years and there are 2 more years till the term is there. In the meantime, who will become the president of United States of America is the vice president. The vice president will be the president of United States of America for the next 2 years. So this is how their constitution. So the vice president there is a real executive, but whereas in India, the vice president only acts as a president. He does not become the president for the remainder of the term. So that is not possible. So to that extent, try to understand the way the constitution is designed is the vice president is not a real executive, whereas there in United States of America, the vice president is a real executive, because in general, you see the constitutional system in India is based on parliamentary democracy, where even the president is not a real executive. Whereas in USA, it's a presidential form of system where the president is a real executive. So his deputy, the vice president, is also a real executive. All right. So this is the basic understanding you should have. So I will discuss some of the important provisions. From the examination point of view, I have discussed most of the important constitutional provisions related to the Vice President of India. So what are the various provisions with regard to the Vice President of India? So first we have understood his qualifications in office, his conditions of office, and then we understood other constitutional dimensions. Then we have understood vacancies in case of the office of Vice President. Then we have understood his powers and functions. We also understood the comparison between the Vice President of India and the Vice President of United States of America. And of course, the most important thing is the comparison of removal of President and the Vice President. Although I have not made this comparison, but I have already discussed the removal of the President, and now in this lecture I also discussed the removal of the Vice President. So please make note of the majorities that is required. Please make note of in which house it can be introduced. While the impeachment of the President, the impeachment motion can be introduced in either houses, but whereas in case of the Vice President, it can be introduced only in the Rajya Sabha, and the majorities are different in both the cases. So all these things has to be kept in your mind. So these are all very, very important area where the questions can be asked in the examination. All right, so with that, I'll just go to the last part where I wanted you to solve this particular question. Look into this particular question. The proposal to remove the Vice President of India and Rajya Sabha requires, what is the majority that is required? Is it simple majority, absolute majority, special majority, effective majority? So one among these is the answer. You can put your answers in the comment box. I'm quite sure it's a very simple question, but you should not forget this. So with that, I'm coming to the end of this particular lecture. So there are only 2 to 3 lectures probably which may be pending in the executives. I'll try to complete that. And once we complete that, then we'll move to the next very, very important area, that is the legislature. So I would suggest all the students to watch the entire series in a chronological order for the maximum benefit. But if you're watching an independent lecture also, you will still get a lot of value. But for the best output, you can watch it in a chronological order. And if you like this video, please refer it to your friends and family members who will be preparing for the examination. And I'm quite sure with 100% conviction, it is going to be extremely useful to the students preparing for various competitive examination. And you can benefit the maximum by looking the series in a chronological order. So with that, I'm coming to the end of this lecture. And if you have any queries related to this particular lecture or any of the other lectures, so please do consider me as your friend or a mentor. You can reach out to me for any kind of help relating to the examination. So thank you very much. All the very best.